let's go ahead and get started. Thanks for joining. I appreciate you taking some time out of your day to talk about estate planning. So today I'm going to be presenting on estate planning, the basics. We're going to go over a bunch of slides. Hopefully it gives you some of the basics from estate planning and gives you some information that you can use and take away right away to apply to your own situation or maybe somebody in your family. So that's our topic for today. So let's go ahead and get started. If we take a look at estate planning specifically, the first thing to note is what is estate planning, right? So I want to definitely talk, about some of the process of what estate planning is, understand a little bit about some of the common goals that people have when they talk about estate planning, talk about the probate process. What is probate? I know a lot of people have probably heard about it. Some people have probably been through it. We're going to talk about some wills. We're going to talk about trusts and when would you use one versus the other. And at the very end, I'm going to give you a tip called the red envelope program, which is a good tip to kind of have in your back pocket. So that's kind of the agenda for today. But let's go ahead and get started. Let's jump into it. So what is estate planning? At its definition, it's a process, right? So planning is a process, right? And really that process is 4 different areas. So as with a lot of financial planning, the first part is discover, right? So that's how we define it here at Moneco. But you really want to understand what are the goals that you have for estate planning, right? What are you trying to accomplish? That's the first step. From there, then we actually go into modeling. And that's where I like to live at its core. I love modeling things out. And you can say, okay, let's look at different what if scenarios, right? How do things look if we were to gift money to kids or if we were to set up certain kind of trusts? From there, we actually come up with certain strategies, right? So once you look at the what if scenarios, you say, okay, that's great. What do we do, right? And that's what strategies are. And then navigation's a big piece right now, right? So what is navigation? That means as things change, what changes do you need to make? So, for example, recently they made changes in legislation that says it's now 15 million or 30 million per couple for lifetime exemptions. If you don't know what a lifetime exemption is, it's okay. We're going to get to it. But that's a change in law that might impact you. And so you need to take a look at your estate plan. So navigation is an important thing as well. As a matter of fact, I just got off a client meeting just now where we had somebody that was doing some planning for their parent, and their parent had just moved into a facility where they were getting some help. And so we had to take a look at the parent's estate plan and make some changes and tweaks as to how we are approaching things for them. So very common to take a look at that navigation step and update things. All right. So the first step is estate planning is just the process. So when you talk about an estate plan, it's really the process of going through these 4 steps and applying it to you and your family. All right, next. So what do we see? I mean, I talk about estate planning a lot. These are some of the things that I see or I hear from clients, right? That they want to avoid probate. They want control over their estate. They want to limit taxes, right? They're worried that all their hard-earned money is going to go to the government and not their heirs. Sometimes I'll hear special needs planning, right? You might need to take care of one child differently than another one. And the biggest one I hear, and I hear this over and over again, I don't want the family to fight when I'm gone, especially over money. So I can tell you, I have seen it numerous times. When somebody passes away and they've not done proper estate planning, it can be a spark that lights a fire and just burns the whole family to the ground. So it could be really bad. So a lot of times people will just come in with that in mind, saying they want to make sure things go smoothly, right? So those are some of the common things that I hear. I don't know if any of those are, ring true with you, but certainly that's what we hear from our clients. Now, let's switch gears a little bit. Let's talk about some of these terms. Probate being the first one. So what is probate? Well, probate is a court-supervised process to distribute all of your stuff, right? And also talk about who's going to take some of your responsibilities, whether it be kids, right? So it's a court-supervised process. That's what probate is. You have probate judges, you have probate court. And then what happens is anything that goes through probate The court will see if there's a will on file. It needs to be an original will, needs to be up to date. But if there's a will on file, or you file a will with the probate court, that's a guiding document that the court will look at to make decisions on how to distribute assets. So that's in general what probate is. Now, who provides that will? Well, that would be the executor or the executrix. And they are usually a named person in the will. So if I died, I named an executor or executrix to take care of this process of going to the probate court, filing the paperwork, making sure that all these distributions happen, right? So probate, again, that's the whole process. Will, that's the document that's needed that the executor can take to the probate court to make all this stuff get assigned and go to the right people. All right, so that's probate. Now, the next question, and I always get this, what's a probatable asset? Just fancy for what goes through the probate court and how do I avoid it? That's what most people want to know. So how do you avoid it? Well, if I go to the right side of the screen there, what's a non-probatable asset? Anything with a beneficiary on it, right? So it could be a joint account, could be a TOD account, transfer on death account, where you have a named beneficiary. It could be a retirement account. Hopefully you've named beneficiaries on your retirement accounts. Every once in a while, I'll see it named as the estate of, and then it does go through probate, so you got to be careful there. And trusts. Trusts can also avoid probate. What doesn't avoid probate? What goes through probate? Well, houses, cars, jewelry, stuff, cars, checking accounts, savings accounts, right? All of this, basically everything that doesn't have a named beneficiary. Now, why is that an issue? Well, because probate takes time and it also takes work. So let's just say theoretically somebody passes away and you want to be able to pay the funeral expenses fairly quickly or any other last minute expenses. Liquidity or the access to cash is important. And so anything that's going to go through the probatable process, as soon as a death certificate is issued and Social Security is notified, they'll actually notify a lot of the financial institutions and they'll freeze the account. The accounts are frozen until it actually goes into the estate of so-and-so. So having non-probatable assets can actually make it a lot easier to get access to money, and something you should absolutely consider when putting together your estate plan. So that's the basics. You have probatable and non-probatable assets. I know, exciting stuff, right? All right. So here's another thing. I get this all the time. And as a matter of fact, I see issues with this. Which one takes precedent? And I don't expect you to answer out loud right now, but in your head, if you have somebody named in your will, does that take precedent or the beneficiary? So for example, we have a client theoretically, right? And she might have a big 401k and she had named her husband as a beneficiary on that 401k, but unfortunately they got divorced a year ago. Then she passes away. In the will, the client's done a great job, has updated her will to say her 2 kids get it. However, never updated the 401k beneficiary from the old 401k 3 jobs ago. So that still says the husband or the ex-husband. Who gets the money? The answer? The ex-husband, right? So there's an issue there with beneficiaries do take precedent over the will and over the probate process. So definitely something to be aware of. And that comes back to that navigate step. Why estate planning is not something that you just, draft a bunch of documents, you throw it in the drawer and never think about it. True estate planning is the ongoing process of looking at these things, making sure that everything is up to date and having that process, on an ongoing basis. So that's will versus beneficiary. Make sure if you get nothing else out of this presentation, take a look at your beneficiary designations and make sure they're up to date. Okay. Next one, let's talk about some of the documents, right? So this is estate planning basics. You would understand that documents are part of estate plans. Some of them are distribution documents. So these are documents that guide how your stuff, how your assets are distributed, right? So some simple ones, you have wills, revocable and irrevocable trusts. And I'll talk a little bit more about trust planning and irrevocable versus irrevocable, maybe a little bit later on. That's 201 estate planning. But at a high level, revocable trusts are just trusts you can change your mind. You can revoke them. For instance, I wanted to create a trust to put my house in. But if I sell my house, I want the money back so I can go retire, buy a ski house or something fun, right? I can revoke that. And that's a revocable trust versus irrevocable trust. Once I set up the trust and I gift the money there, so theoretically I put my house in an irrevocable trust, I can never take it out of that trust. That money is in that trust for good. Why would you do that? There can be some advantages to avoid estate taxes on the irrevocable side. The revocable side is considered inside of your estate. All right, so let's peel that back. That was 201. Let's go back to estate planning basics 101. But that gives you a little glimpse into that. But those are some basic types of documents that you might be seeing out there for estate planning. Now let's talk about disability-based documents. Well, disability-based documents, it might be a permanent disability, don't get me wrong, but it also could be a temporary disability, right? So if somebody needs, for instance, I had a client that did this. They actually had they were involved in an accident and they were in the hospital for quite a while. They had a named financial power of attorney to help them pay the bills and to continue to keep the money flowing. So that would be an example of a disability document that's a temporary disability. Somebody's unable to act. So you need somebody to actually act in the financial capacity for you. It's a financial power of attorney. Well, those who are reading ahead on the slide might know that the medical power of attorney is somewhat similar, right? Somebody to actually make healthcare related decisions. So I always say this, God forbid something happens to me. Who do I want making a decision if the doctor comes and says, listen, we can either do surgery A or surgery B to save his life? Who do I want to trust to make that decision? It's a big decision. So that would be who you want to designate as a medical power of attorney. So those are some disability-based documents. All right. So let's move on from documents. And I'm moving fast today, but it's estate planning 101. I'm trying to cram a lot in here. So one of the things that everybody always asks me about, what are estate taxes? All right. So you have estate taxes in addition to probate fees. So probate fees or probate court fees. Estate taxes are taxes that are due to either the state and or federal government upon passing. Some states have them, some states don't. Federal government has estate tax. Now, it's definitely when you pass away, money goes through there, but it actually, believe it or not, can apply to gifts during your lifetime, right? So anytime you gift above a certain dollar amount, you have to pay this tax. So federally, they just increased that to 15 million or 30 million per couple. If you're lucky enough to be above the 30 million mark, congratulations. There's definitely some planning that you need to do to avoid or try to reduce that tax liability. And there's some things you can do specifically around discount gifting and gifting to irrevocable trusts. And there's some other really cool strategies that I love geeking out on. But again, we'll save that for 201 or maybe even 301 for the estate planning course. So that being said, the estate tax also applies to gifts, right? And you have lifetime exemptions. So again, 15 million or 30 million is current federal lifetime exemption. It changes per state that you live in. So every single state is different. I'm not going to cover all 50 of them here, but if you have questions, hit us up. I'm happy to chat about any of this stuff. And I could, go through your specific state. But lifetime exemptions are important when you're looking at gifts as well. So oftentimes I'll hear, as a matter of fact, just yesterday, we were talking to a client who was saving money so his daughter could have a down payment for the house. Awesome. That being said, there are some gift issues if that gift is above the annual gift limit, right? So the annual gift limit is the annual limit that you have to file a gift tax return if you give more than X dollars. Currently, I believe it's 19,000 every year. It changes, and after 20 some years in the business, I always want to double check that. But nonetheless, when you're doing these annual gifts, if you're going above that, let's just say theoretically this client gifted 100,000 for a down payment for a house. Anything above that annual gift limit would have to go on a gift tax return. and go against their lifetime exemption, technically. All right. So you have to take a look at these estate taxes and just make sure that you're doing it the right way. Most often, it's not going to be an issue with where limits are today. That being said, not that long ago, the limit was 600,000 for gift or for estate tax, right? And then for 1 year, it went away. There was no estate tax. So this is a political football that will move. And I expect it to move several other times in the future. So something to pay attention to and definitely a piece of estate planning. But that is estate tax. All right. Now, on that topic, I'm actually going to do another video, another webinar where I'll actually dive in deeper and we'll talk a little bit about estate tax and gifting through lifetime exemption. We're going to gift through annual exemption, and I'll talk about different types of gifts and strategies you can use to reduce that estate tax liability because it can be quite large. So look for that in the future. All right, let's get into mistakes. What do we see that we look at and say, wish that would have happened differently? Well, number one, not updating a will or beneficiary, right? So we have client cases like this from time to time. As a matter of fact, we just recently had one last month where somebody didn't update the beneficiary on their retirement account. It went to one child instead of both. That happens. So not updating wills and beneficiaries is the most common thing. Again, if you get nothing out of today, check your beneficiaries on your accounts. I recommend looking at it on an annual basis for our clients that we do planning with. We go through this at least once a year to just update and make sure everything is still up to date and kind of congruent with the way the family wants. But nonetheless, do that on an annual or regular basis. All right. Another one is leaving money to the kids directly. I see this a lot too, where people and it comes from a great place. They want to take care of their kids. They want to make sure that their kids are taken care of. And so they'll leave money directly to the children. And not only that, it might not be the most tax efficient way of doing it either. So I'll give you an example. We had somebody that passed away, left money directly to one of their grandkids. And it was intended for college. They called it a college fund, but it was not a 529. It was not a college specific fund. That child, next thing you knew, had a nice new motorcycle. True story. So you never know what's going to happen when you're gifting money directly to kids. Maybe you're okay with that decision. Knowing this grandmother, I'm not so sure she would have been, but who knows? So you just have to consider that. So if you're going to gift money, doing it through trust might be appropriate, doing through 529s if you want it to be for college. I mean, there's a lot of different ways of doing it, but be careful of that. God forbid something happened to my wife and I don't want my kids getting control of our estate and all that money when they're 18 years old. And that's what would happen if we didn't have proper controls in place. All right. Another one is not having discussions with older family members. Boy, people don't like talking about money. I mean, I do, but most people don't. So this is something that we see all the time. If you're not willing to have that conversation in general about what the desires are or what people want to have happen, it can blow up after somebody passes away. So I love having the conversation early on, and it doesn't have to be about exact numbers. You don't have to say how much am I inheriting, but you do have to say what are your desires, and generally do you have something in place? And this is something that we do quite a bit. We can have family dynamics meetings where we'll meet with multiple generations and just try to help, right? Try to help have that conversation, foster a conversation where we can actually get a general idea of what's going to happen. Okay. Leaving heirs in disagreement is the next bullet point. You can imagine if you don't do that bullet point we just talked about and have that kind of discussion, there can be fights over money. You see it all the time, right? The other thing is, one of the things that I see quite a bit is confusion over what would have the deceased person wanted to have happen. So we put it on here as translate last wishes. It's really, if somebody goes and they wanted to support something, having having that knowledge of what they wanted or what they intended carry through is important. Now, of course, you can put it in the will. Of course, you can put it in documents, and big things, like are definitely in there. But what about that chest that they bought in 1936, right? That's been in the family for years. Did they want it to go to somebody specific? Did they care if it was sold? Do they want to make sure it stays in the family forever or not? Maybe that creates somebody, it's going to sit in somebody's house because they feel bad that they don't want to sell so-and-so's chest, right? And then they're going to be stuck with it for the next 30 years. Those are the kind of things in general, having understanding of what last wishes would be helpful. Okay. And then another thing is the thinking you only need to change the will is an important one. Beneficiaries, obviously, we've covered that. I think I've hammered that into the ground like a tomato steak. You need to change beneficiaries. Okay. All right. And this is going to be where we're starting to wrap it up. What in the world is a red envelope program? Well, why I call it a red envelope program, I can't remember, but 15, 20 years ago, I started this. And the concept is that you put together I do it in a red envelope or red folder, but you put together a place that has a list of all the important contacts. Who's the first call, right? We're honored by a lot of our families to be listed as that first call, but who would your first call be, right? Um, a list of all the insurance. Here's who you need to go to for insurance. Here's the accounts, pension income, credit cards, loans, car title locations, right? Phone passcodes. It's as simple as that, but God forbid something happens. What's the passcode to their phone? You need to know that. And then also, if they do something like a LastPass or a 1Password, a password keeping app, how do they get in to see the different passwords? All of that's going to be really important. And so we like to put together a program called the Red Envelope Program, where you can list out all of these things into one spot. You put it in a red envelope, and you put it with your will, your trust, your documents. Usually, our clients would give us a copy of that as well, so we have it. Certainly not the passwords and things like that, but we have a copy, or we at least know where it is. Um, but nonetheless, then what you want to do is tell the executor, here's something I've done. Generally, here's what it means, and here's where you find it. So God forbid something happens for me, go to my safety deposit box in my local bank, and there'll be a red envelope there, or go to my fire safe in the closet, whatever it might be. Okay. So the idea is this is kind of a roadmap or a guideline to leave behind. God forbid something happens. Okay. So we're coming to the end here. Estate planning. Who needs it? Well, pretty simple. Anyone who's going to die, right? And so that would be obviously everyone. Now, whether or not it's urgent and you have to do it immediately, that's a different story. But everybody needs to do estate planning. This is something that I feel very strongly about. Whether or not it needs to be at the top of your to-do list or not is a different story. But I think going through this process is really helpful. And that's why having somebody to help you go through it, whether it's us at Moneco or someone else, I think it's just important to have somebody walk you through that process. And it's got to be more than somebody to just draft the documents. I think the document creation is very important. But the reality is, if it's just a bunch of pieces of paper and you don't do anything with it and you don't review it, it's not going to be a living, breathing estate plan. All right. So I will open it up to questions. Anybody have any questions on the webinar? Raise your hand if you do. I think I can allow you to talk. All right. If you raised your hand and I didn't see it, I apologize, but I don't think I see any hands raised. So we're going to go ahead and end it for there. So thank you so much for joining for this webinar. Again, if you're wanting to learn more about any of our estate planning topics, I'm hoping to host a couple more of these. Specifically, the next one would be on lifetime versus annual gifting and gifting strategies you can use. But thank you so much for joining, and I appreciate your time. Have a good day. Okay, Derrek Metz here. Welcome, everybody. I promised earlier those who were on the estate planning seminar that I would give some bonus slides. So here they are. Real quick, I just wanted to go over something called estate maps. Now, specifically, whenever I talk about estate planning, this is how I take a look at it. So I'll draw a map, specifically with the gift or the donors on the top left. So you can think of those as the parents. Maybe the kids on the bottom right there. You can see there's 4 of them in here. Anytime you actually gift between generations, you're going to go through what's called a tax barrier, or a state tax barrier, right? And that's what that red line is. Now, there's 2 loopholes in that state tax barrier. The first one is the annual gift tax limit. So right now for 2025 and 2026, it's 19,000 per year per person. So if you can do quick math, there's 2 on the top left, there's 4 on the top right. That's 19,000 times 8 that you can gift annually without having to go through this estate tax. Now, the other barrier, or the other break in the barrier, is lifetime exemption. Now, currently, there's some legislation that actually just changed this in 2026 to be 15 million per person. And in this example, there's 2 people, right? So that would be 30 million. So that's the lifetime exemption. So when we're talking about estate taxes and we're talking about estate maps, it's really important to understand which assets are on which side of the map. And so usually we'll actually divide the assets up based on where they're owned, right? So you can see assets in the top left, those are owned by the specific people, right? So whether it's a house, a business, personal belongings, retirement accounts, checking accounts, whatever it might be, versus stuff owned outside of the estate. So that would be 529 plans or maybe some irrevocable trusts or checking accounts for the kids, something like this. So specifically, the last piece to think about is where trusts come into play. And I mentioned this in the webinar earlier. Specifically, you have revocable trusts, which are on the top left, and then irrevocable trusts, which are on the bottom right. And that's the biggest advantage of irrevocable trusts is once the money is gifted onto that side, it can grow and blow up on that side of the tax barrier and not be subject to estate tax. So this is the big deal. And this is what we do all the time for, especially in high net worth planning, right? The idea is to try to gift through that annual or that lifetime gift exemption. So that way you're not subject to estate tax, and then have that asset grow outside of the estate. So let's use an example. Let's say you're very lucky and you have a $30 million business, right? You actually might even be able to get a discount on that because of lack of marketability and control. Like we'll talk about that later. But essentially you can gift that 30 million into an irrevocable trust. It can grow outside of that, outside of your estate, inside that irrevocable trust, and avoid estate tax. So these are just a couple of different tips and tricks and thinking about estate maps. I hope you found that helpful. Thanks so much.